Hi, I'm Vince Mai, and this is the making of the Ant Jazz music. Ant Jazz is a YouTube video I produced by shooting a time-lapse movie of my ant colony. The jerky nature of the visuals required a special approach to the music, and this video explains my creative writing process in coming up with a soundtrack. It's a pretty long video with quite a few technical musical terms, but if you like seeing a deconstruction and how all the individual parts come together, stick around to the end, and I pretty much break out most of the components. I hope you enjoy it and gather insight into my composing production process. Hi. Let's talk about the Ant time-lapse song. I think I called it Ant Jazz. And let's just discuss the motivations and how I created this song. Let's just take a quick listen to it first. And it goes like this. So, in writing music for this piece, I had to look for certain inspirations. First off are the visuals. And what do the visuals tell me? It's like an ant society, and it's filmed in time lapse. So everything is kind of jerky and way faster than how quickly these ants actually move when they're in their home situation where this was filmed in. So everything becomes kind of jerky, kind of fast, and it seems like they're in a state of confusion. Really, they're not. They actually do function in a very predictable, systematic way, just unbeknownst to us, all the subtle intricacies of which. Because of that, I have to do something that I think is a little quirky. So, not quite normal, and a little bit strange. And so I've gathered my influences from a classical composer such as Edvard Grieg, who is most famous for his Peer Gynt suite, in the hall of the Mountain King or something like that. Also from Danny Elfman's work with Tim Burton. There's a number of cues that come from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which have influenced me. He tends to use quirky, almost circus-like grooves, but mixing in different sort of harmonies that sort of make you feel like things aren't quite right. I think also influencing this project for me might be some of the works of Bernard Herrmann. I think he did some stuff with the stop animation. And back in the 50s and 60s, I think they were, maybe 60s, and that they were kind of wacky and kind of strange sounding. Now, I mentioned the word circus because it's got a circus sort of feel to it, and because of that, I've got it, doing a sort of an offbeat, quick cut time feel, and it's done at 101, which may seem kind of slow, but because it's kind of a double time feel, it's actually, if you were to get a real band to play this as a march in cut time, it would be, in at 202 beats per minute. So it clips along. Okay, let's take a look at the piano part, and you'll be able to see the chords as they go by, just to help you understand, my selection of chords, and why I think it works for the amp time lapse. So take a listen. It's got some really different changes. Like I said before, it's kind of based on that diminished jazz scale, which is not fully diminished, but does follow along that line. So that's one of those scales that jazz players like to practice. Sounds a little weird, but that's what we want. Okay, let's jump to the bass part. You'll hear that scale right there. The next thing I wanted to do is probably to add to that, so that I knew I wanted pizzicato, and I wanted the pizzicato strings to actually play the chords that the piano is playing. And so if we add these ones here, let me just do this, and I always double the things, like pizzicatos, and they are also some of the pizzicatos are playing the bass notes. And they are also, it's not just pizzicato, there's a collegno, and that is where the bow is actually striking the strings rather than plucking or bowing. So, and so just with some pizzicatos in the piano, it sounds like this. I decided to double those again with another pizzicato, but this time with glockenspiel. So it tends to give it a little bit more of a orchestral flavor, you know, having that bell thing in the background. So I'm just going to turn my pianos off here, and this is just the strings, and I added a bass pizzicato, just playing the bass notes, to give it a little more oomph. So these guys sound like this. Can you hear that bell ringing? This is just the pits with the bell, the glockenspiel. One of the idiosyncrasies of this sort of weird orchestral stuff is actually having the glockenspiel in there. It tends to add a sense of wonderment and something otherworldly. It's often used in fantasy genres, and it sort of adds sort of like this magical element to it, which I wanted to have, because, you know, these are creatures that we don't quite understand, and they're not human, but, you know, I'm trying to make it so that we do preserve this specialness and this wonderment quality, and the bells seem to do that really well. From there, I've added a woodwind section to further make it sound more orchestral even, and woodwinds played short tend to have a really nice effect. This is a bassoon part, and it sounds like this. There we go. And I've layered that with a contrabassoon, so let's have both of those in there. And this is primarily just playing the bass part. And I think there's a bass trombone. Let's throw that in there as well for now. So the contrabassoon is panned hard left, bassoon on the right, trombone mostly on the right. So you want to try to spread these things out sometimes, even though in the actual orchestra they might not be so far apart. So that is part of the same system as if you had, you know, the pizzicato bass. So adding that in, that just sort of adds more of a dimension to that moving bass line. All right, so I also used the wind controller on a couple of different virtual instruments, and I think this particular one is also for bass line, and it's got it's sort of bassoon-like in itself as well, and it sounds like this. this is played on a wind controller, which looks like this. And the virtual instrument is called Respiro, and it has a number of fabulous presets in there that are physically modeled. So these are not actual samples, but physically modeled synthesizers that are approximating acoustic instruments. There's a second wind controller instrument here, and this one is called the EVI-ner, or EVI-ner, and it sounds like this. This was played on the wind controller as well. It's a more synthetic sound. And strangely enough, the patch is called Ants. It's just mixed way in the back there because I didn't want it to stick too much and become too synthetic. Okay, now adding to that are some offbeats, which the pizzicato were doing. And so these are reduced in note. So they're not playing like the full chord. But anyway, they sound like this. You're saying, hey, that's exactly the same. No, it's different. These are actually offbeats. So let me stop this and put in the on beats with them. So you'll hear it now. Offbeats. So you'll hear that it's reduced notes. They're mostly just like octave up from the bass line, but on the offbeat. Once again, propelling it. Okay, stopping that. So if we add, let's add all the other things that we just talked about. And so this is definitely the main orchestral groove without the percussion, which we'll talk about in just a second. That's a counter line, which is not played in the pizzicato strings. There, little things like that to sort of add interest. So those are just repeated notes. Okay, so that is the main drive. From there, there's a couple of percussion tracks, and one of them being a triangle and the other being wood blocks. And the triangle is a real triangle played by yours truly. A little sloppily, but hey, doesn't matter. And the wood blocks are from a virtual instrument, and I think those are just MIDI played in MIDI, and quantized a little bit, and just different timbres of the wood block, and it's just to make it more, I guess, humorous, circusy, ant-like. And so anyway, these two percussion tracks sound like this. you'll notice they're panned hard left, right. Okay, so if you throw in the everything with the percussion, it sounds like this. There's a tritone there, boom, boom, and that's kind of for the weirdness of it all. It's very popular. Danny Elfman uses that kind of stuff. So, okay, let's see what else we have here on this main section here. Let's go to the melody. Now, this melody is pretty wacky. And it was mostly improvised, and then I, manipulated it and just cleaned it up. And for the most part, I decided to keep it. There's a bunch of so-called wrong notes, but that's okay. That's what I wanted it to sort of sound like, because it's playing notes outside of the chord. And that's what I call wrong. But there's degrees of wrongness, and some of these are kind of stretches your imagination. So I'm going to turn on the piano part again, and then you can just sort of hear for yourself. Mostly diatonic right now. There's a weird one there. Going up chromatic, so it hits a lot of weird stuff in there. And another weird one there. And then coming back in to be very consonant. So when you have a progression that's going up based on a diminished scale, but you're having this melody that's happening very chromatic, you're going to get lots of sort of grindy notes here and there, depending on where you put it. And I'm sort of juxtaposing chromaticism with this diminished sort of scale approach. And that's where the weirdness comes from, because it's not strictly sticking with that. And then sometimes, as the chord change goes to something that's a little more stock, like when it resolves to the typical 5 on the E minor, where it goes. I'm still exploring with my melody. Just a little bit. I'm still doing some chromatic sort of stuff. So anyway, that's the main melody of the piece, and it gets reiterated later by the trumpet. So that basically is everything in the thrust of this particular song. Let's just listen to this beginning section here. I don't think we need to solo anymore. We can just play it. very weird, wacky, crazy circus-like. That's the way I look at it. So what you're hearing is the trumpet solo over the initial bass line, slightly voiced differently. I've took out the offbeats, so the piano's doing it, colenos are doing it, the pizzicatos are doing it. Everything's playing unison, just doing that lower part. But there are bell parts that are playing little accents. So I brought the solo back in to play what the other instrument's melody was, just to end off the solo. The solo itself, like I had mentioned, is more free. It was just basically the first take, and I thought, let's just play what I feel. I did other takes, and I thought, it's more and more restricted and didn't have quite the same feeling. And so I just kept the first take where I just felt, okay, this is what I'm just going to do. And I just played it. Okay, counter lines. So using some of these other instruments, which are mostly bell-like, they're essentially just counterpoint to the bass parts that we hear. So let's just play that. I'll turn off the trumpet solo, and it goes like this. Some strange stuff. Once again, in the chromatic vein. But then sometimes very in the chord. Okay. That swell that you heard was actually a copied part of my trumpet solo that I used on a separate track and then effected it with a huge deep reverb because I wanted that section to end with it a big tail before going into the reiteration of the whole thing. A track that I shut off midway through is this glass steel track, and it's just it's a arpeggiated steel thing that I've processed the heck out of to make it sound really, I don't know, I wanted to sound kind of for the ants as if they were talking or whispering to each other or their thoughts. And this is, after doing a bunch of exploration, I came up with this sound. And, because I envision them to be really kind of complex, almost computer-like beings, that they have these, automatic thoughts and functions going on through their heads, that I needed a sound for that. And so this is basically what I came up with. And it sounds like this. It's a very kind of like electronic, but signal, Morse code-ish kind of thing. But kind of wacky and strange. And a lot of that was done with certain plugins that mangle the sound and sort of take it and make it otherworldly. Okay, so that was sort of the rhythmic backdrop of the this solo section. And okay, so after we finish that, it's mainly a reiteration of the full theme. This time the trumpet is playing the wacky melody, and then it just sort of ends like that. So here it goes. I hope you enjoyed this video of my process, and if you have any questions or suggestions as to what you'd like to see more of, please write them in the comments and I will get back to you. Also hit the subscribe and like buttons for updates for new videos. Thanks again for watching.